Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Lancaster Criminal Justice Meeting. We're going to call this meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Commissioners Brown,
Present.
Fuller, Harris,
Present.
Kerr, Vice Chair Rodriguez, Chairman Little.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Would you all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, and Commissioner Kerr will lead us.
We'll do it all together. Everybody face to the flag. Ready? Begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Any presentations of any time? No speaker cards for agendized items of any type? No. Consent calendar. Has anyone had a chance to review the consent calendar for the approval of the minutes of January 10th? We have a motion to approve by Commissioner Brown.
Second.
Second by Commissioner Harris. Please vote. Revote.
Oh, revote.
Three, one with abstention. Abstained by Commissioner Hurt. He was absent at that meeting, so. No new business. So we'll get it right to our reports. Chris, how are you, sir? Long time no seeing you. I saw it. Why is that? Can I? Oh, go, I'm sorry. On your crime prevention, Chris, most wanted, neighborhood watch, illegal dumping, new laws. Seems like every time we turn around, there's a new law that we're confronted with, or handcuffs us in certain things. Most wanted. I mean, you put that out there. It goes. I see a lot of times it's in the newspaper. What else? When you say most wanted, where else is that being posted? Is it a website? Is it, how does the general public get to see this? Are you getting a lot of activity on that? That's fantastic. And what about neighborhood watch? Are we getting neighborhood watch committees and things like that that are actively watching just about? I know in my neighborhood, it seems like we have one person that watches 15 houses on a cul-de-sac, and he can tell you exactly what happens, time of day, when, this and that, and everything else. It kind of irritates some people. It makes me happy. So as far as neighborhood watch, is it active? I mean, is it obviously you'd like to see more?
Yeah, what I do is I can bring Tracy Stewart up right now. Tracy currently manages Neighborhood Watch. She can give you an update.
Hi, Tracy.
Not only do they call the sheriff department, but they call our office and give us information on problem locations, problem neighbors, locations they think crimes are actually happening at, whether it's narcotics, gangs, you name it, they let us know.
Tracy, do you feel that in that crime prevention, neighborhood watch, there's a lot of people that won't make that call because they're afraid to?
There are some,
And
yes.
how do we educate them, or how can we educate as a commission to the general public that it could be anonymous? And, there's a lot of people out there that says, I'm in an area that I don't want to call.
We do have that. We encourage the Crime Stoppers for the folks that want to remain anonymous. Or even in the past, I've told them, call the sheriff department. Just give your name and phone number. If you don't want a deputy sheriff coming to your residence, they can call you on the phone. There's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
That way, no one sees a black and white pull up to their actual residence and they don't know that they're actually talking to the sheriff department.
I find a lot of times in the general public, everyone's afraid to say, I don't want to get involved, but I have a problem.
Right.
And how we can encourage the general public to get involved and to make them feel safe at the same time. It's one of those double-edged swords, it seems like.
Well,
It is.
I can speak to that. From my time in patrol too, they would advise you in the call. It's take that information. They still do. Okay, they advise the informant does not want to be contacted at their location, so the deputies won't make that contact. And the reality of it is any of that information that people give to the sheriff's department on that call is not going to be published to anyone. It doesn't become a part of the record even other than the call itself. So only people with confidential ability to be able to see it can see that. I think the big thing for us is we have a big push. We have a new employee, Randy Davis. Randy, can you say hi? Randy is currently learning everything about Neighborhood Watch and Business Watch. That's going to be her first task coming on board here because we made a commitment at the beginning of this year to really put forth a great effort to expand those programs. So that's where we're going with that.
I'd love to sit down with you if that's a possibility. Yeah, that'd be kind of cool.
I'd like to do the same,
It'd be
please.
very cool, yeah. Tracy, thank you.
You're
Yeah, I was just, I have a lot of people asking that, they want to get involved, but then they're afraid to get involved, so.
We're constantly talking about Crime Stoppers as well, so that's something that we go over regularly. So we want the public to know that they can feel safe to report any crime that occurs here in this valley, so.
And illegal dumping. I mean, you got it, it's crime prevention. How do you're catching anybody illegally dumping, or is it after the fact, or there's something at the site that you can pick up on? I'm not sure.
Yeah, we want to educate the public that there's things out there to prevention. So usually with Waste Management out here, they have 2 times a year that they can go to the dump for free.
Yeah.
So if you're not using those and you know somebody in your neighborhood who's got stuff, and rather than have it get dumped somewhere, maybe make that, offer that to people.
You hear a lot of, I know Commissioner Harris, you probably hear the same thing as far as property owners that are out in the middle, have had property forever, and you and I deal with this constantly, and it says that they've had the property forever out in the middle of wherever it may be, and it's been considered a dump site. And then
Absolutely.
they spend thousands of dollars a year, they clean up a piece of property that they,
So education basically is what we're trying to do.
What I see a lot of too is the things that are being dumped are actually being used by the homeless for shelter. I see more of that. I mean, I live out in an area where I walk in the desert a lot, and you'll see a lot. It amazes me how many encampments they have, and it's like a living room out there, which is part of the illegal dumping property.
Well, and I see just recently there happened to be a sweep in Lancaster here a week ago or 10 days ago. It seemed like the city of Lancaster was making their rounds again and trying to clean up some of these areas that the homeless have been.
Yeah, well, as far as the illegal dumping right now, and under Mr. Brozegan's direction, there's a lot of discussion going on at an executive level at city here, coming up with different ideas on how to target these sites that are common. For example, just one recently at 7th Street East and about age 8 over there, over by Paiute School. That one's notorious for years for being an issue because it's a field right adjacent to a neighborhood that has access, plenty of dirt road access into that area. So trying different things and working together, again, with law enforcement and waste management, them to come up with the different plans to address some of this. And I can tell you some of those things, waste management's a big player in that because of some of the restricted hours that they have, and then what some of the fees are that relate to what it costs to go there. And so those are discussions that are ongoing right now, working with development services and public works on ideas on how for abatement. As far as the homeless issue, that's one of our number one priorities right now at the city. Obviously, the city's working very closely in our council with and invested in creating alternatives for folks, and as the new model is now with the county tax that was put forth with Measure H, and everything is more about transitioning into permanent housing, so not short-term, but looking for long-term transitional housing, and that's where the priority for that money has been going. We're still dealing with a lot of resource issues at a local level dealing with this, and we're trying different strategies as that relates. So we work closely with, first of all, there's a lot of laws that dictate, because there's a complete difference between the law as it relates to folks that are in the public sector and public property versus private property. There's some misnomers out there of what we can do legally and can't do, so it's on a constant educational process. Then we also have to deal with the policies and things set forth by the county that are brought forth by the Board of Supervisors to the Sheriff's Department, and what limitations or things that they have the ability to do. So we're always kind of, trying to find different ways to get around some of the issues that get in our way. And then remember, we deal with very strong advocacy groups that are tied to homelessness too as well. So we want to walk that line where we're being effective, we're helping people that are in need, at the same time not creating litigious society for the city to be ongoing getting sued for the action that we're taking. So we are always balancing those things.
If I might too, Mr. Chairman, Mr. DeRico gave a very good summary of that. What we're doing, the Vice Mayor and I have met with Waste Management to look at different ways that they could help us in this. Mr. DeRico's correct. If you're not open to be able to dispose of anything all day on Sunday and half the day on Saturday, that sort of defeats the purpose. I mean, it's not their fault. They're doing some good things, but there's things they could do better. So we're looking at those ways to do it. We do have a recycling center at the city that has won awards and takes tons of garbage off of the street. We're opening 2 satellites, one on the east side of the city and one on the west side of the city, satellite locations. It should be this year. We're going to make it a focus of the budget next year, which the council will consider in May or June, to beautify the city. And part of beautifying the city beyond standards and such is to clean up some of this and to hold people accountable. When Mr. DeRico says it, someone can report to us and say, that person dumped stuff there, but it seems ridiculous, but unless someone sees them, catches them or whatever, can't prosecute them. if you dumped all of your trash with your address labels in a desert, and it has everything on it, including a map to your house, unless there's evidence that you did that, you know. So we are hamstrung, but it is a focus of staff to present to council coming up in June.
Thank you, Mr. Mosina. That's great. Any other questions or questions on reports that Chris gave?
Chairman Little, can we give Lieutenant Fender some time here to go
Absolutely,
over some things
Lieutenant.
he'd like to bring?
I'm sorry, sir.
It's fine. Good morning. Thank you for having me again. It's not that often that I get to come and address you. Captain Weber had a different event he had to attend this morning, so thanks for having me here. I just wanted to give a little perspective. I know the Deputy Scott comes out to the commission and presents the crime stats, and I'm asked quite often how we compare to some of our sister cities, Palmdale, Santa Clarita. So I wanted to give a little bit of information just to put it into perspective where Lancaster falls. I don't want to take a lot of time and dazzle you with stats, but I think it's important for you to understand where we stand up against other cities of comparable size, even though the demographics might be a little different. I researched some of the information from Lancaster, Palmdale, and Santa Clarita crime stats over the month of January, and what I found was we're very comparable. We're right there in terms of some of the crimes that are committed. We're pretty much even with Palmdale. We're similar in size. Santa Clarita actually has a little bit greater population, but in terms of burglaries, we're within 5 or 6 of each other across the board. We're up a little bit in robberies. We had that spike in December that I told you about last time I was here, that we had that spike over the Christmas holiday that we ended up solving 13 of the 14 that actually got spiked. So that put us a little ahead in robberies, but other than that, Santa Clarita actually has more theft than we do. We have a little bit more assaults, but I just wanted you to know and have a little bit of perspective where we fall in terms of comparing us to similar sized stations. For those of you who don't know, the Sheriff's Department is made up of 23 patrol stations divided over 4 patrol divisions. And Lancaster, Palmdale, Santa Clarita, Malibu Lost Hills, and West Hollywood fall within North Patrol Division. So rather than pull numbers from Malibu Lost Hills, which is significantly smaller, or West Hollywood, which I think has a square mileage of one square mile, it wasn't really comparable to these. Go ahead, sir.
I'm sorry, in our square mileage that you're covering up here.
690 square miles.
Yeah.
The last time I checked, about 690 square miles. Palmdale's is about 720 square miles because they go up over the mountain towards Wrightwood. But between Lancaster, Palmdale, and Santa Clarita, by far the greatest square mileage in the entire, I mean, we take up 2/3 of Los Angeles County if you take into account the square mileage of those 3 cities. So anyway, I just wanted to give you a perspective on where we stand in terms of crime compared to some of our sister stations. And the only other thing that I wanted to touch on, kind of piggybacking off of what Deputy Scott brought you, is I realize that every month when we give the crime statistics for the land cap team or the burglary suppression team or the robbery suppression team, they're usually good stats. I mean, we take a lot of people to jail. I think they're doing a good job of protecting the public. But I really wanted to tout some of the work of our traffic division. They're kind of a smaller group of unsung heroes in my mind. I mean, I didn't work traffic, but now that I'm filling the capacity of the operations lieutenant, I have the pleasure of seeing all the units within the station and seeing what everybody does. And the traffic unit, I believe last year filed or got filings with the district attorney's office. I think it was 10 Watson murder cases. So those are our DUI involved fatalities. They're putting in a tremendous amount of work with the district attorney's office. They're getting a lot of filings. And I wanted to give you just a quick update on 2 of the ones that were prominent in the news within the last month and where we stand on those. On December 26th, the day after Christmas, a 17-year-old female was walking on Avenue I, right about 15th Street West, and she was struck by a driver who was estimated at driving at least 93 miles an hour in a 55-mile-an-hour zone. The toxicology reports came back on that individual. He tested positive for marijuana. She was killed. She actually died the next day. But they've been working with the district attorney's office. They put together a great case. They got a filing for gross vehicular manslaughter in that individual. So someone's going to be held accountable for that young woman's death. And I know, that, like I said, those are prominent in the community, and usually the public wants to know what's going on with some of these cases that are high profile. The other one that we had was on January 11th. We had a triple fatality at the intersection of Challenger Way and J8. and 4 individuals in that vehicle had ran the stoplight, I believe, and basically T-boned a family of 3, a 22-year-old, a 26-year-old, and a 60-year-old perished in that crash. They identified all 4 suspects at the scene. There was a bit of confusion because the suspects kind of pointed at each other. None of them were driving when they were interviewed by the detectives. I wasn't driving, well, I wasn't driving, well, I wasn't driving. So the detectives put a lot of work into that case, a lot of work, and they're working closely with the district attorney's office on that one. They're about 95% sure that they've identified the driver through some blood evidence and some other things that were in the car. They're on their way up to Sacramento probably next week just to rule out one of the occupants, one of those occupants of the suspect's vehicle who doesn't live here anymore conveniently. But they don't believe he's the driver. They're going to go up and grab his DNA and rule him out. But they should have a filing on that very soon too. So I just want you to understand that there's a lot of work that goes on in that traffic investigations unit. They're kind of an unsung hero that doesn't get a slide up here usually.
Right.
But
Lieutenant Bennett, thank you very much for the update. Appreciate it.
Lieutenant, as far as on traffic too, when there's an infraction and an officer pulls over an individual, and obviously the standard proof of your license, registration, and proof of insurance. What's the standard procedure when there's no proof of insurance?
usually the deputies will issue a citation for no proof of insurance, and a lot of times it's what's considered a fix-it ticket. So they'll issue the citation, and as long as the driver comes in and produces that they had insurance at the time that they were issued that citation, it's usually rectified at that point.
And there's no penalty as far as a fee on top of that at that point in time?
You know, it depends on what the judge wants to do. If the judge assigns a fee to the citation, he can, or a lot of times we'll issue the fish. I think they can come over to the Highway Patrol office as well. They could take it to the Highway Patrol office and have it signed out that they had proof of insurance. They just didn't have it with them at the time.
Is there something that could be looked at as far as saying that, I mean, it seems kind of strange because a lot of things I hear about out there on the street all the time is there's an infraction, nobody wants to exchange. One person has proof of insurance, the other one says they don't. By the time they try to exchange, they're sitting, and officers cannot get to that fender bender in time, whatever it may be. I hear from a lot of people that say, they don't have insurance, and their insurance company investigates and this and that and everything else. It seems to me like, could there be some type of infraction for somebody that says you're supposed to have proof of insurance? Right. Either you have it in your wallet, you have it in your glove box. I have it in my wallet and my glove box because, half the time I can't find it in my glove box because there's too many napkins in there.
There is a statute that says you have to have proof. You should have proof of insurance, otherwise you're cited. So, but there's also a statute that says you're supposed to carry your driver's license with you at times, and we'll constantly pull people over that left their wallet at home. They have a driver's license that's issued, but they left it at home. So, they'll issue them the citation that basically you bring in your proof that you had your driver's license, and that'll take care of it.
Something on that, though. If you don't have insurance, trust me, if you want an interesting thing to see at the traffic court, go watch what happens to people that don't, and that fine structure. Okay, so they receive a citation, and sometimes the judges will let them go. You go out and prove you can get insurance, but 90% of the time it's because they can't, because of their history. Okay, so that prevents them from doing it. So they shouldn't be on the road. And the reality is that fine is significant. That is a significant citation. It's one of the highest ones you'll see out there.
And it's a compounding. I think it's been a long time since I wrote a traffic
citation. Yeah, it is. It's significant.
I think it's a 500 and then a 2,500 and then
right. Very expensive. But the reality of it is everyone should have a driver's license and have insurance. And we have a lot of people that don't. And if you look at when the guys run DUI checkpoints, and if you see some of the numbers from that, the majority of those citations that are issued at those checkpoints are for no driver's license, no insurance, those type of issues.
But they can go to court and prove that here's my driver's license, I just didn't have it with me.
Right, and just like any fix-it ticket, if you prove that you've remedied the issue, there's usually a fee that's attached just for processing that the court charges. But if they can prove they had it at the time. But it also, and I don't know what the section is in there when you're in an accident, there's certain things you have to do that are required by the California Vehicle Code. One of them is that you provide the other party all your information and your insurance. So they can be cited for that as well, for violation of that.
Any questions?
One question, back to the Challenger event, and some of those people came down Love Valley Hospital Emergency Department, but is it lawful to ride go for a ride in a car with no driver?
No driver?
That's what they're saying.
Oh, I see what you, no, I guess it wouldn't be. Someone's got to be operating that motor vehicle, sir.
Lieutenant, thank you, sir,
Yes, sir.
for everything you do. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. California Captain, how are you, sir?
Good morning. Doing great. Thank you. I wanted to go over just a few quick stats for us. These are going to be for CHP jurisdiction only, meaning unincorporated county area and the freeway, not including the cities. But for the month of January 2017 versus the month of January 2018, just to have a fair comparison, we're actually doing pretty well so far to start off the year, mainly in part that we have more officers on the road right now just due to some scheduling changes that were made, and more people are healthy. We don't have injuries like we were plagued with last year. We also got some trainees recently that are now fully trained and working the beat, which is good. So versus last year, our total number of traffic collisions we took in January of last year was 150. This year it's down 13% at 130. DUI crashes, last year we had 7. This year there's been 5 so far. Fatal collisions, last year we had 2. This year we're as of today, I was driving in this morning and we had one just as I was on my way in over on San Francisco. So there's been 2 so far this year. DUI arrests for us, last year we had 36. This year we're up to 41. And then our overall enforcement contacts, last year we had 1,117. This year 1,771. And that's because our patrol hours are up. So far this year, we're just talking about January, we had 1,694 versus only 1,375 last year. So it's 27% more officers working on patrol in the area. We did 21 traffic safety presentations out in the community. We're very big on that, and one of the most successful ones we do is the Start Smart program for new teen drivers. They come to our office with their parents and learn about the dangers of driving impaired, driving distracted, making foolish decisions. A lot of it's about decision making. It's probably one of our better programs. So we did several of those. But that's all I have to report today as far as our statistics. Do you have any questions for me? I'd be happy to answer.
Well, I can tell your presence is out there because I've seen it. You know, it's been incredible. The 14 seems to be, I see CHPs even on the side streets. It's a welcome presence, if you ask me. So I can tell there's been a beef up as far as traffic and things like that. So,
Are you completely manned for this area? I know you guys were on a hiring.
We are still down a couple of positions. We are still requesting more. We could definitely use more people. It's just the population growth we have not kept up, but that's true statewide, so it's kind of difficult. The department has requested 300 additional officers from the governor's office, and they're in negotiations. They've been that way for the last several months, and so far they haven't approved them. But we get lots of requests from the public via our Facebook page, and 98% of them are people asking us to be in certain spots more often. And we just recently revamped our program that we have for traffic complaints. So if a citizen calls the area, wants to have more enforcement because they have identified a specific problem where they live or somewhere where they drive to and from work, we have a new system to make sure that those complaints are addressed, and it's not just a one-time thing. We go out there more than once, and we meet with the person that made the contact. So we're trying to be responsive to what the community is asking us to do.
And how often do you guys actually police the surface streets as opposed to the freeway, or do you ever?
Well, so we're responsible for all of the unincorporated county area. So anything that happens on a surface street or a freeway, it doesn't really matter. As long as it's in unincorporated county, that's our primary jurisdiction for responsibility. And we assign officers to patrol those beats. So we go all the way out to Little Rock. We go up to Wrightwood, Leone Valley, down to Acton on the freeway there. And then anything you see on the map that's unincorporated is considered ours. If there's an accident, we would be the ones to respond.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions? Thank you, Kevin. Appreciate it. Thank everything you do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Franklin, sir. How are you?
Okay, thank you. Unfortunately, downtown didn't provide me with the statistics I need, so I'll have to report on those at a later time. There is a couple areas, though, that I wanted to bring to your attention for your situational awareness. Beginning February 21st, juvenile will be now at the Antonovich Courthouse. So there's 2 courts that have been built out to house the juvenile matters, or to handle the juvenile matters. So that portion of the handful of DAs that do the juvenile matters will be housed, as I assume the public defenders will be as well. So that'll commence, like I say, on the 21st. Also, and this is in implementation now, we've gotten a big spike in prison cases. I think we have close to 200 active prison cases right now. So we're, the court has set up one court to handle all of the prison cases, and that meets 3 days a week, and that goes from preliminary hearing from all the way through jury trial. So it is, unfortunately, it takes away from the cases that we have here in Palmdale and Lancaster. But we do have a tremendous amount. There's a big spike in the prison cases. So again, that's for your situational awareness. And finally, we do have a fantastic working relationship with CHP and with the sheriffs on all cases, but in particular the DUIs and so forth. Really a very good working relationship. I'm hoping, I know Assemblyman Lackey was trying to get some traction on the marijuana front, because a lot of these fatalities aren't necessarily alcohol. It can be a tremendous amount of meth, or they're high on marijuana, and it would be nice to get some correlation studies. So hopefully the legislature is doing something to assist us with that, in particular given the fact that California's legalized marijuana. And that will conclude my presentation.
Mr. Franklin, could you please go a little bit more in detail? Prison case, are you talking about a case that's actually eligible for prison, or actually an incident that took place in prison? I just want to clarify.
I'm sorry. Yes, it's actually those that occur in state prison.
Okay.
And actually what we do is we're now, like Kern County, for instance, has 8, because there's like 4 or 5 prisons in Kern County. And they have, it's a large number of DAs that are assigned to that. I think it's like 6 or 7, and then a couple DA investigators as well. So we're trying to get that set up as well. We actually bill the state for our services, and it comes out of the, I'm assuming, the prison budget, since it's all, these crimes are centered in the state prison. So it's inmates attacking a guard, inmate on inmate, people smuggling in drugs.
And you say there's a spike in these cases?
There is.
Has it constantly been going up, or just recently it's just?
I mean, I'll tell you what we've seen a lot on is possession of cell phones. And that's a real problem for obvious reasons for inmates to have cell phones. And people bring them in. And then we also, there's a few things I could talk to you offline on. I'm not sure I'd want to necessarily mention it on, over the way.
I appreciate it. And secondly, if you'd like to go and get the report, we'll wait.
Just gotcha. But no, they're crimes that actually occur in state prison, and this is a level 4. So we've got some bad guys here, and
wow.
they commit a lot of crime.
Take the time, it's already been taxed on Mr. Franklin, and add more to it.
Right.
Yeah. Makes sense, doesn't it?
Still costing us money.
Still costing us money.
Just a comment on that, though. I attend meetings on the oversight committee over at the prison. An interesting came to light when the prison task force from the FBI came in to have a discussion with CDCR and corrections, and actually their policy dictates now if you're going to enter a cell to retrieve contraband like a cell phone and things, they require a search warrant to go into an inmate's cell to recover contraband. Yes, the policy does that because of litigation that they've received from inmates. But the thing that's interesting is they said the problem is they call the judiciary to get a warrant, and the judges are like, you don't need a warrant. It's a jail facility. It's a prison. You don't need a warrant. So it's a very interesting phenomenon that's going in there just based on how litigious that's become from the inmate standpoint and advocacy people suing CDCR and the things that go on. And I don't think the public has any idea that some of this stuff's going on someone who's already incarcerated. So I think we're all forgetting what the definition of incarceration means.
A search warrant.
A search warrant.
Right. No, it's not legally required, but
I can't believe it. I won't believe it.
So it was interesting to talk to the prison personnel because of what the frustration level was for them, because they can't make entry into that cell until they obtain it. Okay, now let's hope to God that never happens in the county jail. Okay, I don't think that'll ever be a policy from the sheriff, but that is a ridiculous situation that's occurring there.
Mr. Franklin, you're a black belt, right, sir?
I can neither confirm nor deny.
Okay, well, I can only imagine how many bags you go through when you get home at night over the years. The leather bags that you destroy, because it's amazing. So, I mean, I hear this stuff and I'm just going, wow. Every time I get information from Mr. Franklin, everyone, I just go, what the heck? It's amazing. So.
Next thing you know, kids will be doing the same thing, getting a search warrant to check their room.
Take the door off. That's license up there. My son locks me out of his room to take the door off. It's your house.
Did it several times. It works.
Yeah, it works very well. I've done the same thing. Yeah. Mr. Franklin, can't thank you enough. Thank you, sir. Jocelyn.
Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. Just a personal comment before I dive into things. That story is why I'm glad I'm not a civil litigator. I would quit. I would give up my bar card if I had to do that. Just want to circle back really quickly on the illegal dumping conversation that you all had a little bit earlier. I know that the executive team is developing some longer-term permanent solutions for the overall problem and some of the underlying reasons for it. As an interim measure, the legal division has been working with the people in environmental, in Public Works, to put together abatement notices and emergency abatement procedures for when there has been illegal dumping on an undeveloped property. As you mentioned, Chairman Little, quite often those are properties that are long time owned by non-local people who don't they're just holding them, and I get that, but they're not paying attention to their properties. So we try to, A, notify them, put them on notice that they are still responsible for the property. If it looks like there's electronics or other hazardous materials that have been dumped, we have emergency abatement procedures so the city can enter onto private property and take care of that, and then we work with the property owner to recover our costs. A lot of that is an education process, so we send some correspondence and try to communicate with the long-distance property owners and remind them that if they're not going to keep an eye on their property, they should consider retaining local property management to check the property once every week or so. So that's just, it's kind of a stopgap measure, but it's working fairly well for right now, and then we're looking forward to seeing what the executive team puts together as far as a longer-term strategy. Last month, I mentioned to you that we were working on a human trafficking ordinance in response to the mayor's direction that we do so, specifically relating to the motels in the city that seem to be a haven for prostitution and underage prostitution and human trafficking. We are actually, Lee and I are meeting with the Sheriff's Department Human Trafficking Task Force this afternoon. One of the things I'm hoping to get from them is some information about the kinds of criteria, the kinds of indicators that a motel manager should see that should put him or her on notice that maybe there's some human trafficking activity going on. We need to be able to link what's there at the motel to the motel operator so that we can perhaps issue an administrative citation to that person, that they knew or should have known that that kind of activity was going on. Lee and I have talked about doing some education to the local motel owners to remind them of their obligations and their responsibilities. We're sort of, where I'm looking at with the ordinance at the moment is some kind of a fairly stiff administrative citation process so that they're fairly punitive in nature that'll really kind of wake people up. And obviously there's still some criminal element associated with that. And there's also, the penal code has a red light abatement law wherein a building that is used for prostitution or human trafficking is de facto a public nuisance, subject to abatement. We could file an action to enjoin the maintenance of that nuisance behavior. We can effectively shutter the property for an entire year so the property owner cannot collect any rent or use it for any purpose. We can sell off all the fixtures. There's a $25,000 potential civil penalty, half of which would go to the city. So we do have some remedies available. We're just still working on putting the ordinance together, and I really am hoping to get that to you next month and in advance of the meeting so you can review it, and then we can have your comments at the March meeting.
Some of the locations that have been pinpointed, are owners of the property saying they're not aware?
Doesn't matter. The red light abatement law says whether you directly or indirectly maintain it or allow it. So that's the kind of language that we're looking at for the ordinance as well.
Interesting. Yeah. Any questions? So So would there be a program put together, or possibly a program put together for management? Just like I hear when we talk about teaching ABC stuff, AB this and that, and everything else, would there be something that somebody would have to come to and say, this is what you need to look for, this is what you have to keep your eyes out for?
That's absolutely what we're talking about, and those are some of the indicia of human trafficking that we're looking to get from the task force today, and that would be part of the education process. And let them know, of course, in addition to heavy administrative penalties that we're looking at, ultimately we can revoke your business license.
Right.
Are these areas specifically just Sierra Highway, or are they throughout the city?
I'm sure they're throughout the city. I haven't gotten any particular statistics yet. I'm hoping that we can get that sometime soon, but I know that Sierra Highway is a huge problem area, obviously.
Well, it'll be interesting to that, Josh. That'd be great. Yeah. So, any other questions? Thanks, Josh. Oh, I wanted to ask you a quick question. How's the problem housing coming? That's, I mean, the reason why the reason. No, not because of that. Just for Howard wanted me to ask that question. No. I had a friend who was popped in on a house and came across somebody vandalizing and tearing it up. And this was a house that needed work, and he's obviously trying to get this thing out-of-state owner and so forth and so on. And basically, right in the middle of town and came across this. So I was wondering how things are coming or finding the owners and, I mean, I sympathize because I know how trying to find a property owner at times on a piece of land or whatever it may be, it's not always the easiest thing in the world.
It's actually not finding the property owner, it's being able to put the pressure on the property owner to do something. I think I mentioned at the last meeting that we have one house that's just in horrible shape and continues to be, actually it's a duplex, and the owner lives in Florida. So what am I going to do? How am I going to go after him? He's not going to, what does he care if I issue a notice of arraignment, right? So that's the main problem. It's status quo. We just handle them sort of one day at a time. As I mentioned before, we are trying to encourage absentee property owners to consider putting their houses up for sale. It's a good time to try to sell in this city. Plugging along one day at a time.
There's nothing, Howard, that states that, obviously, is there something that can come up with, or some type of ordinance or something that a property's been sitting there forever, and property owner in Florida, whatever it may be. And
we have a project we're doing on Beach, and on the corner of J2 and Beach, there is a 2-story apartment building that's been boarded up, I'm guessing, for the last 9 months. And we see people going in and out of it. There's people that are breaking in it and living in it at different times. And that's been that way for almost a year.
Actually, and I know Lee has some comments on this as well, we have dealt with that property owner and her legal counsel. And as a result of the actions that we were taking and where we were going to be heading with that particular case, she did finally retain a contractor. She ponied up the insurance money from the fire at that location, and at least some work had started and some fencing and some boarding up had occurred.
They started it, they fenced it up, and it's been left that way for the last, I want to say, 4 months. And like I said, we're doing a project directly across the street.
Okay.
And I see people going in and out of that property all the time.
Time to pick up on that one again.
Yeah, we can readdress that. The problem is on the building that's on the east, they're separate. There are 2 buildings actually on that property. The east building is the one that burned, and it burned all the way through the floor and everything else. So there's a huge structural issue related to that one. We met with her, we made her, actually, just to be honest with you, and this is just kind of how it is, we took her lawyer and we made him go with us to the property when we scattered about 15 homeless people out of there. And he got to see what it was doing and the impact there. And if you notice down on J4, we've already abated that property there, and that's one Jocelyn can talk about where we have an absentee owner as well on that one, that we're probably going to move forward with demolition of that property because it became a haven for drug dealing on the corner.
Right.
But you can see we even posted a city sign on it like it's the city's property just to deter people from going.
No, I called Elizabeth on it, yes.
Yeah, but we handled it. Okay, so.
How many property owners surrounding pieces of property like that are calling you and say, what are you doing about it?
Well,
and then, and say.
It's the same problem we had when we went in 2008, 2009, when we had a significant number of REO properties. Right. And then through those REO managers were spending out of their own money these bank-owned properties that never transitioned to anyone's name. They were still in the name of the prior owner. So then you were chasing your tail all over the place with those 2 as well. We talked about at the time, the city did, brought forward some ideas about requiring something at the city's local level to require an REO property or a bank to take possession and formally foreclose on it within a certain time period and take possession, because they were just letting them sit there. Okay, so they had no accountability or responsibility, weren't paying the taxes on the property, and it became a haven in all these neighborhoods for these issues that were going on. I agree with you. It's a process that we have to go through their notice and their due process to take action on those properties. But we spend a lot of time doing that.
Well, I just discussed this with Sergeant Bender on the property we're renovating. The owner has spent about $200,000, getting ready to spend another $50,000, and probably 10 to 15 of that has been repairing vandalism. And it's really bad when you're talking to your client that lives in another state and they're saying, you know what, just get me the heck out of there. I'm done with this place. And that I don't want to hear that, but we need to do something with areas like Beach because they're basically taking control.
Well, and I see too, and I come across a lot that says, I'm out, what do you want me to do? I'm in another state. They can't touch me. I'm going, well, yes, and you're fighting it and saying, what, is there something that ordinance-wise, something that can sit there and say, can the city take this stuff quicker? Can they do something with it quicker without going through this whole process? Then somebody gets an attorney, and I know that slows the process down. Not you. I'm not referring that, yeah. But
Unfortunately, on my side, I do slow the process down sometimes because I'm the only lawyer in the building, and so sometimes these do sit on my desk, and I apologize for that.
no apologies. I understand your workload, so no, that's
We
not.
could absolutely discuss beefing up our property maintenance ordinance. It's good the way it is, but we've had some conversation about adding some additional teeth to it. Perhaps I can give you all a copy of that chapter, and you can take a look at it, and we can have some further discussion. There's a limit to really what we can do, but we can notify the property owner and the lender that we're going to take over the property and we're going to demo the structure. We've gone down that road a couple of times already. I think we're sort of just waiting to see what happens in spring when people start hanging out at those kinds of properties again. I don't know.
It's amazing to me that maybe there's not more property owners around us, surrounding residents like that would sit there and say, who is this person? Do I have a right to file something against that property owner? And when somebody sees something like that in their neighborhood, I don't know. I see it's a problem. I see it attracts that element. I see it doesn't matter what time of day you pull up on it, there's somebody in there.
Right.
And they're acting like they're working. They've been there and this and that, everything else. So it's
Before
amazing.
Lee chimes in, I do want to say, a neighboring property owner does have a private civil cause of action for nuisance. That's not just a public nuisance that a city or a governmental agency can bring. So that's always an option for somebody. But of course, it costs a lot of money because
Yeah.
lawyers are expensive. Well, civil litigators are expensive.
Yeah.
Here's the reality of it, too, is if it was a place where it's a haven for drug activity, the asset forfeiture process has even become more lengthy than it used to be. So we used to be able to take properties, if we make a property owner aware that this criminal activity or narcotic activity was taking place on their property, then and they didn't take any measure or steps to remedy it or evict the tenants or whatever that may be, then we could seize the property through an asset forfeiture process. Now, that's not attractive at times because the Fed always changes what percentage the Fed gets, the state, and then the local jurisdiction, who actually spends all the money for the resources. So sometimes it's desirable because the percentage is in the favor of the local jurisdiction to recover their resource loss. And then at times like now, it's not. It's more favorable to the Fed and to the state than it would be for us at the local jurisdiction to asset forfeit those properties. But what Jocelyn's talking about is completely different. That's completely a different civil process as it relates to abatement. So if we don't have specific criminal activity other than their trespassing, okay, then we would have a difficult time through asset forfeiture because it doesn't qualify under certain criteria. And then remember this, once we take possession of that property, we're responsible for that property at that point. Okay, so we create another burden for the taxpayers on maintaining that property to a certain level, right? And what is the impact from that outlying issue? J2 is obvious. We've had a lot of issues over there. I grew up in that neighborhood. I grew up on Adler, right down the street. I drove through that neighborhood my entire life. Jeff, your family owned the property right there on the corner on J. So we understand the problems there. The other issue is redevelopment through the city's process was going through, that was another zone for redevelopment, and then when the state took away those redevelopment dollars, that stopped and stalled that. So a lot of that empty lots you're seeing on that street once had apartment complexes on them that are similar to the issues you're seeing there on J2.
Okay.
Thank you, Jocelyn. Yes, sir.
I had other things to talk about. I think I want to really shed some light on an issue we're dealing with right now. And I got to tell you, I look at these three guys across from me, and I know how hard they all work, and Chris, and the CHP, I was saying to Jocelyn earlier, as I drive around now, I visibly see a different presence from your office since your arrival, Captain. Actively. I passed 5 different CHP radio cars the other day on the 14 that had people stopped. And you know how people drive on the 14.
You bet.
So, and I know they've been writing a lot of citations on the 138 as well and up on Avenue D. Joey, he's a local guy, and they bust their tail over at our station. And we're lucky because we have a very unusual situation at our station that we have the majority of our personnel live locally here. So they're vested here in our community. But we as a city are going to be addressing something right now and under Mr. Bozigan's direction regarding the vacancy factor at the station. Okay, and I'm kind of springing this on Joe here because I wasn't sure if we were going to talk about it yet. But our station, since I came here to the city since 2009, has been working on an incredible vacancy rate, staffing deficit. Right now, currently, there are 27 sworn items down at the station. And really, based on the sheriff's hiring practice and a lack of recruitment for many years due to budget, it doesn't look like that's going to be remedied anytime soon. But at the same time, we at the city are paying millions of dollars with a contract that's $26 million plus for certain things to have the tools at our station and the personnel there for these guys to do their job. Even in light of all that, it's incredible what we've endured legislatively and what the station has been able to do in the past couple of years with reduction in crime. That goes to that makes a statement about the ability of and crime fighting ability of the individuals that are in this room and at that station and how dedicated they are to our community. At the same time, for us at the city, we have to really kind of look at different ways to do things if we're going to continually look at this issue that doesn't seem to have any kind of remedy anytime soon, based on retirement, based on how slow the process is, even talking to folks down in recruitment where the academy classes, when I went through back in 2001, were 175 to 200 cadets are down to 90. Last year, they only ran 10 classes. 90 was the largest class they had last year. That's not even going to get close to filling in on their retirement issues that they have coming up. I went through a large hiring push in the 80s that went on for several years. Those folks are all retiring right now. All the people I work with are retiring at this time. And I don't know exactly what that number is. But at the same time, we're still paying a fee based on what that station's supposed to be staffed at, based on those overhead items, radio cars, all those things are built into that program. Just one 40-hour non-relief car right now through the Sheriff's Department with liabilities about $260,000 a year. Now, we know deputy sheriffs don't make $260,000 a year. All that differential is paying for radio cars, fuel, detective items, overhead, support staff, all those things that are supposed to be in place. And I'm not even sure where we're at on the civilian side staff there, and Joe would know because he's the operational lieutenant. But we're actually going to make a push now. We want these guys to have everything they're supposed to have to work within our city and what we're doing as a community to pay for that. And that's our expectation. Thank God we have a great Sheriff's Booster program here that is able to provide things. We can point to 100 things that these guys do over and above and beyond the call of duty that's required for them, basically, and then looking at what we're facing legislatively. Steve dropped one on us earlier. We'll have to showcase that with our legislative representatives, okay? And all those things that are going on that are tying their hands, along with some of the policies and things that are being implemented to try and offset that deficit based on contract minutes. So everything we do, and we could take hours to explain this for the public, but we base all our fee structure on contract minutes that the deputies provide, that the Sheriff's Department provides. So they're having to use basically their overhead or their administrative staff to fill that, and Joe does a great job of managing this, to fill that required minutes that we have, so we have full staffing out in the field and with our task force teams. But you can understand after this many years, there's a certain fatigue factor that's going along with this for all the personnel that are all maxing out in overtime every month, month after month, after month, after month, year after year. And it's an issue. And so we really want to address that. Mr. Bozigan's working with the other city managers at this time to kind of bring this, sunlight this issue with the sheriff, and it's going to be a focus for us for the next several months. That if we're not going to ever see that, then we need to look at different options we do with that resource to do other things that help impact the quality of life in our community. And they need to fulfill their obligations.
Is the recruiting way down? Is recruiting way down? It used to be, I mean, years ago, it was tough to get into that recruitment class.
My test date had over 4,000 people test. The attrition rate is what it is. it's about 94%. 94% of those people that first take the first written test will not make it through the academy, based on
94%?
94%.
For every, the factor, or the numbers that I got, for every 100 people that test, 3 will become deputy sheriffs. 3 out of every 100 people that take the test. You know, the sheriff's department is obviously trying to go through a large hiring push. They're trying to hire people. They're not willing to lower the standards just to get warm bodies to fill patrol cars. So we're kind of behind the 8 ball. And I think, you know, personally, my opinion is what's gone on in the United States over the last couple of years in terms of law enforcement and some of the coverage they get. I don't think as many people are trying to go into that profession as they did like
I agree.
years ago when I was a law enforcement officer. So the department is staffed an entire bureau with recruiters, and they're trying to revamp the entire recruiting process to make it more streamlined. But I think at some point they don't want to lower the quality of the deputies that they're hiring either, because those are the deputies that are out there policing the city. So, and like Mr. DeRico said, Lancaster Station, we have the greatest amount of vacancies of any of the 23 patrol stations. We're short 23 deputies, 4 sergeants, 2 lieutenants, and 4 secretaries. But we're the busiest station in the county, and for the public that doesn't understand some of the other stations, that they hear names of like Compton and South Los Angeles, and they assume that those places are busy. Lancaster is far busier than any of the other 23 patrol stations. We have more calls for service. We have a greater reporting district or area of jurisdiction. We handle more calls. We write more reports. It's not even close in the amount of reports and calls for service as compared to some of the other stations. So those between 23 and 30 vacancies, they really impact the station's ability to do their job. But to Mr. DeRico's credit, and I appreciate him saying this, the people at Lancaster are working tremendously hard. I mean, they've been doing this for years, working with 23 deputies short and 2 lieutenants short, and they're but they get fatigued. It becomes at some point
Are these,
retired.
I'm sorry, are these other stations just as shorthanded?
They are. Actually, I'll be honest with you, I think Palmdale has 1 more vacancy than we do. We're short. We're the 2 shortest stations. I couldn't tell you honestly about the other vacancies, the other stations. I don't know their numbers, but I know that we're the greatest number of vacancies.
Well, I'm just thinking in terms of the big fight we've had over the last several years about the money used for homelessness and how we don't get our fair share. And I'm wondering, is that the same thing with, you know, deputies? Are we not getting our fair share as opposed to other cities?
I mean, when we're given items, when we finally put an academy class through, and those bodies are ran through custody division, once they come out of the jails and they're made available for patrol, I mean, obviously the sheriff and his administrative staff have to divvy those people up equitably among all the patrol stations. And we usually, in North Patrol Division, every time that we get bodies, Lancaster and Palmdale usually get the majority of whatever bodies we get. The problem is we're not hiring as a department. We're not hiring enough people to fill behind the people that we're losing through attrition. So if every month North Patrol Division's allotted 5 bodies to spread amongst their 5 patrol stations, they could either give Lancaster all 5 of those items, they could give 1 to each station, but I lose 3 people to retirements, or someone goes out long-term injury. So I'm losing 3, but I'm getting 1, and we're constantly playing.
It seems like that, well, not so much that also too, but it also has to do with equipment, newer equipment, things that we're on the last end of the stick at times, you know, up here, you know, and
I think that, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No.
And I think that's gotten a lot better in the last couple of years. The Assistant Sheriff, Bobby Denham, he was my patrol station captain at Palmdale. The Undersheriff, Mr. LaBerge, he was the chief of this division. Pat Nelson, the last captain of the station, he is now the commander in our division. So I think that getting those people up into the upper echelon of the Sheriff's Department's command staff has really opened their eyes to Palmdale and Lancaster need to be a priority on this department because of not just because of the money they spend in the contracts, but the amount of work that these deputies are putting out here. So I do think that that's getting better.
And listen, the calls for service issue and thing, we have a very engaged community, which is what we want. Okay, we promote that through neighborhood watch and those things. So it's not indicative of we're the busiest station because of the amount of crime we have comparably to these other cities. It's indicative because we have an engaged community, very engaged. Mark, did you?
What's the denominator? If you're 22 down, that's 22 out of how many? What percentage are you down?
I have 236 budgeted items, but that's including my professional staff. I believe our number is 160, I believe, for sworn. That would be from the deputies all the way up through the captain, 160. So it's 23 deputies short of.
It's
about 136 deputies, so we're short 23 of those.
and we're actually short too, if I may. I'm sorry, Mark. I'm sorry if you were done. No, I didn't know if you were done, sorry.
No, I am.
I appreciate Joey, and Joey's sticking his neck out a little bit, which is unfair to him. We are not getting what we're paying for, okay? And it's not the station's fault, it's not the captain's fault. Our citizens are paying for 27 more deputies that they're not getting, and that's 4 sergeants, 23 sworn, and 6 support staff. You can make that up in the short term by having other people fill on overtime or having people fill on Thanksgiving, New Year's, Christmas, everything. But for a long time we haven't. As Mr. DeRico said, if it were any other vendor, we'd stop paying. We would say that. And we haven't done that. We have a long-standing relationship with the sheriff, and I know Sheriff McDonald's is trying, and all those good things are there. But we're at the point at which we need to do something different because there is no end in sight to these vacancies. And we as a city need to look at other alternatives and how we can augment. We can't just sit and wait for a decade or so to get fully staffed. We haven't been fully staffed. Likely, I've been city manager for 10 years. I don't know that we've ever been fully staffed, and we're at about the same amount. So, yeah, it's something that it is intolerable, and it's not fair to the deputies to have to continue to work overtime to do their job with no end in sight, and it's not fair to the community. There are less people answering phones, or there are people working that are answering phones that are on 12-hour shifts or whatever, and you're going to be cranky if you work overtime despite the money every week. So, yeah, it's a big, big problem that seeps throughout everything, and we're going to tackle it head on. Mayor Paris has made it a priority, and he's going to talk directly to the supervisor and the sheriff and everyone about what do we need to do.
Is an alternative to have your own private department? I mean,
that's probably my opinion only. No, that's not an alternative. The sheriff's department does a wonderful job in emergencies and everything, but there are certainly things that can augment. You know, part of it is if we had like truly robust data, we could determine, for example, how much of the sheriff's department time goes to something that we can say, we don't want you spending your time there. We'll take that on. Or we'll hire other people to do that it's maybe not a critical public safety aspect of it. We want to do this, at the core of it, it's for the deputies. It's deputy safety, it's deputy morale. They deserve to have a full complement of people, and so does the community. And you can't point to anyone and say it's the sheriff's not doing it or this isn't doing it. It is what it is where we're at right now, but we only have to worry about Lancaster. And we need to look at options for Lancaster. But no, it's not getting your own department. It's likely augmenting with other services.
The unfilled positions, would you say it's a function of lack of supply, lack of recruitment process or breakdown in the process, or lack of budget, or maybe something that I didn't identify?
I don't think it's, I mean, you're asking me, I don't think it's I don't think throwing money at it's the problem. I think it's just finding the quality applicants and getting enough of those quality applicants through the process. I know they've streamlined the process. I think it's just finding quality applicants that want to be police officers in some capacity and then getting them through the academy process.
well, in light of what's happened over the last 5 years, I could see what you're saying. There's a lot of people that said, I'm not going to mess with that. So,
Well, the other side of that is, too, they did go in a hiring freeze for several years, but because the county froze the sheriff's budget under Sheriff Baca. That was before. That went on for almost 3.5 years. So they almost basically were down to just a few classes. But, that's put them in deficit. But that's historical, by the way, in the county. The county goes through that all the time. And you'll see it in a lot of things. Mr. Franklin's had the same issue in his department where he's lost some of his most experienced people. Okay, so he thank goodness, has a great crop of young attorneys that have come in there with a desire to do the job under his leadership, but he's suffered the same issue. So it's kind of a trend in the county overall for the last 30 years, but it seems to significantly have impact in light of all the things Joe just talked about. Finding qualified candidates, finding people that want to do it, and that attrition rate needs to stay what it is, by the way. okay? Because you want to make sure that you don't have someone that's coming through the process that's going to be problematic down the road. And then we have other issues that relate completely to liability. Some of this cost incurment is going on both sides of the coin for the county and the cities because of the way the county council has managed litigation. Okay, it seems like we're settling cases in the 11th hour all the time after we paid millions of dollars in attorney fees when that case probably should have been done earlier. And that's another direction that Mr. Bozigan's managing as well with the other city managers taking on that issue because we incur that liability. And so a lot of this litigation impacts us on a percentage. So we went several years without having to pay anything for liability because there was a surplus in the fund. Now it's going to go up to 10.5% in July based on our contract rate. Now, if you're Paramount and your contract's only $4 million, that's not that big a hit. But when your contract's $26 million, that's a big hit for us to absorb. Just even that 0.5%. So that's what's been happening the last several years. So now where we're at is give these guys the tools they need to do their job that they're supposed to have and that we're paying for. Okay, and if you can't do that, then we need to work together to come up what's a solution for that. But these guys, they run out of hours 3 weeks into the month. Okay, if we have something we have to do it towards the end of the month or some event, we're scrambling countywide to get deputies to be able to do it because everyone's maxed out. And Joe's a magician, okay, how he's balancing that in there as the operations lieutenant. He has the worst job in the sheriff's department, as far as I'm concerned, trying to keep a lid on all that and keep us up to our contract rate minutes that are required every month at that 98 percentile. Because that's the contract. They have to be in 98% of compliance with those contract minutes every month. He does it. I don't know how he does it. He's a magician, but he does it.
That's how I stay thin.
Yeah.
Well,
He works 25 hours a day.
along with all the regulations that are being passed along and people doing this, obviously, the job just gets tougher and tougher, no matter what area you're in, so, man.
Yeah, so when you look at that picture too, what
Yeah.
you're up against, I think it's interesting for everyone to understand what things have done legislatively too. And I'm glad we talk about those things here because I don't think the public right now in our current legislature, they just do things. And it's never really sunshined out there in the media or anything what they're doing. Just the recent laws with juveniles are just craziness. I mean, there's all kinds of things like that going on. So we just want these guys to have what they deserve to have there. And we're happy to pay for it as long as we're getting what we're paying for.
I agree. Anything, comments? Okay, Russ, you're up.
Well, that's all the more reason for.
I've been writing all the questions for Russ. He wants to defer to the younger guy, the good-looking one, Rick. Okay.
Well, that's all the more reason for everybody to come to our casino night for sheriff boosters on April 7th.
Yeah, you'll be able to bring up that up.
And who's the MC, Howard?
Your boss.
Yeah.
Senator Knight.
Thank you all for allowing Russ and I to speak. Pertinent to what I actually wanted to read to you today was an article that Senator Wilk had in the Antelope Valley Press. But to give you kind of a little bit of update what's going on in the state, we must put everything into effect to go to deadline by this February 17th and to pass out of the Senate by June 1st to go on. One of the bills he's still working on, Mark, is Senate Bill 792. That's still going on to bring more funding equity to trauma hospitals in the North LA County area. This helps all of us. It's just not criminal justice, but every one of us to get that more money from LA County. As of right now, in the Senate and the Assembly, there's 626 bills. In the Senate, there's 232. It's a total of 858. But to give you kind of a historical fact, total bills last year, Democrats in the Assembly would introduce 1,330. They had a chapter rate of 33.3%. Republicans in the Assembly introduced 462 and only were able to chapter 17.1. Senate's about the same way. 37% were Democrat and 16% were Republicans that passed, giving approximately 35% of all Democratic bills passed, only 16% of Senate bills passed. And on part of that, if you don't mind, I'd like to read this article that the senator put in the paper. Criminal justice reforms eroding our safety. Crime in our streets is on the rise. Our state has begun to plunge in safety ratings and weigh reminiscences of the 1980s and 1990s. This time it is neither due to crack cocaine epidemic nor the emergence of gangs in our neighborhoods. No, this time it's due to a gang of leaders in Sacramento under the dome of our state capitol who have sent us spiraling back into public safety oblivion. The cause? Some of the worst offenders are breaking out of our jails and flooding our streets, thanks not to Hollywood-esque escape plots, but instead to a host of public safety reforms implemented by Sacramento Democrats over the past few years that continue to erode any sense of public safety in our communities. It started in 2011. California put in place sweeping changes to our criminal justice system with seemingly no forethought as to the consequences of their actions. Assembly Bill 109 was the first step of the slippery slope that we now find ourselves tumbling down with no control. It mandated, among other things, a relaxing and post-release supervision. The effects of this change have led to some serious and even deadly impacts on our communities. In the last 18 months, 4 California police officers have lost their lives in the hands of criminals who would, were it not for AB 109's lax supervision mandates, have been behind the bars the days their heinous crimes were committed. The perpetrators were all recently released from our criminal justice system and had reoffended in the time leading up to the murders, one being arrested 5 times since his last stint in jail. Previously, all these cases would have constituted parole violations for these career criminals and soon-to-be cop killers, violations that would have landed them back behind bars the day they committed these horrific crimes. But thanks to the radical changes in our public safety policy, they were let go, setting in motion events that ended with 4 officers laid to their early rest and 3 communities, including those in the 21st Senate District, who were cut deeply by the execution of LA County Sheriff's Sergeant Steve Owen. Unfortunately, these are the extremes, but not only examples of the majority's party failures in both violent and property crimes have skyrocketed in our state, where police are now forced to play catch and release with criminals who have otherwise been bound for the jailhouse. In 2014, Democrats came back for more, duping voters into supporting a measure that ultimately led to the release of thousands of California prison inmates back into our communities. Prop 47 has now seen an estimated 10,000 criminals sprung from our prison system directly to our communities. It included no enhanced supervision, no treatment for those addicted to drugs and alcohol, no accountability whatsoever. It was a jailbreak, plain and simple. Even worse, the initiative made it harder to lock up these criminals in the future, and the ramifications of these failures are already being felt throughout the state. As kids, we're told to learn from our mistake, but apparently some in the state never adopted that principle, because just as negative impacts of AB 109 and Prop 47 became apparent, they once again displayed their penchant for punishing California communities rather than its criminals by bringing forward another round of dangerous reforms. Prop 57, passed in 2016, will ultimately release nearly 35,000 more prisoners to our streets. This time, though, they won't be low-level offenders as claimed with Prop 47. No, this time they will be rapists, arsonists, sex offenders, human traffickers. By most any standard, they will be the dregs of our society. As these and other changes continue to be implemented, we will see more and more crime in our streets, more and more criminals on the loose, and more there will be a need for conscientious legislators and committed law enforcers to do what we can do to clean up the messes of these rash and reckless policies and keep our communities safe. To the people of California, I promise I will be a champion for them in that cause, that I will do all I can do to ensure real reform is brought to California's public safety policy, reform that prioritizes the good people of this state, not the bad ones. Thank you.
A quick question.
Yeah.
These propositions took funding in order to get passed in the state of California. And so somebody thought it was a good idea to increase the criminal load in the communities and were willing to put up money to market these propositions. Where's the funding for these come from?
Generally, that funding comes from Democratic caucuses, and they use all sorts of funny names like Safe Streets. I think that was Prop 47, make our streets safer. Because the idea the concept of that idea was that we have too many criminals in prison, which I think criminals should be in prison. I don't know about anyone else, but I think it kind of just goes to the norm. But we have a big cost of maintaining our prison system. So by reducing the cost, by releasing prisoners back into our streets, is reducing the cost of that prison.
The Democratic caucuses work for political advantage. In other words, who's going to tend to vote for the Democrats that are supporting these if they pass them? Who's their support? I'm not sure I can understand who thinks this is a good
unless
idea.
I actually go back and look where all the funding and money came from, I don't want to make that assumption.
So, Rick, go back on safe streets.
Yeah.
That was a prop that was presented. That was something that was presented.
Right.
Okay, and that's the way it was presented, safe streets.
Right.
So an individual's not, who looks at something and says, wow, safe streets, we should vote yes on something like that.
Actually, there's a bill in the process now. It's not presented by Senator Wilk, and Russ, you may be able to help me on the name, but trying to, that any bill that is proposed it has to use correct wording. So it's not as duping the California voters into voting for something.
Do these people have to take a ethics course?
We have to take it once a year.
I mean, yeah. What is that? I mean, we just, amazing.
No, it's boggling our minds.
So we have to take.
It's really upsetting my boss, Scott, a lot. We want to make change, and I don't know how we can make change in this state when essentially state is controlled by two areas, Los Angeles City and San Francisco. The rest of us don't have much of a voice because you look at an area like Senate District 21 runs from Santa Clarita all the way out through Apple Valley. Big amount of people, 971,000 voters. We have each senator has approximately 1 million voters. That's how it's set up, 40 senators, 40 million people in the state. So, but you get a condensed area like in LA, that's like 10 blocks. You're able to really control what you're saying here. You get a Republican senator out for 971,000 constituents, and I don't know how many square miles. It takes us a lot to get out and get the word out that these things are going on. The same thing happens in Santa Clarita, that happens in the Antelope Valley, that happens in Victory Valley. Crime is being committed, and we're letting these prisoners back out in the streets. We need to make some change. We need to make change in the state capitol. We need to have a different governor. But that's just my opinion.
How do you really feel, Rick?
No, I never express my opinions.
Thanks, Rick. Thank you so much for what you do. Thanks, Rick.
I liked Reagan too.
Yeah. You have good news, don't you?
Y'all scare the dickens out of me. That's reality, though. A little bit. First off, happy Singles Awareness Day. My niece refers to that, I believe. Is this what it is? Because I try to keep it. Well, something lacking right now, as Rick had mentioned, that the bills are coming in, so there's not much to report about yet, nothing concrete. Once they're all put in by the end of the week and put together and scattered about, then I'll have some more information. But one of the things that's going on right now is there is a big push from the Assemblyman to fix the crimes that were designated as nonviolent by Proposition 57, and he's working at fixing the loophole created by Proposition 47. Also wants to expand the crimes they can collect DNA evidence for. He also is trying to fix the loophole in realignment that allowed the cop killer in Whittier to get out of jail before he committed the murders. So those are the things that he is working on right now, the information that he's putting together into bills to be presented before the end of the week. One thing he is doing, though, and Mr. Franklin brought this up, is his efforts to get $3 million for drug recognition experts, some payback for the agencies. That is going forward, so that's going very well. Local law enforcement departments can get reimbursed by the CHP for staff time while their officers undergo the drug recognition expert training. And our office would be more than happy to help facilitate any local law enforcement in the AV that is interested in having this reimbursement for them, which is very important in light of Proposition 64. So that's pretty much what it is right now. We're kind of just working on the things to get them put together.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, Russ. Public business from the floor on non-agendized items. The portion of the individual, the opportunity to speak to the Criminal Justice Commission on any item that's not on the agenda. State law prohibits the commission to take any type of action whatsoever. We have a speaker card. Mr. David Paul. Just one. Just one.
Chair Little and Commissioners, good morning. I was sitting there, I'm pretty visual, and Deputy Scott, thank you for the humor to start us off. That was great. I use funner a lot. Another one is more gooder. There's scientific research that shows that if you teach young people errors, they learn to catch them, and it helps their ability to think independently. So that's good stuff, to make fun of things. Humor always helps. You know, I was thinking about, the thing I thought about was a big rope, and it's got dozens of other ropes attached to it, and this big rope doesn't really change except for the pressures that tug on it. So that's what we're up against. Some of these things are intractable, but I like what we do here, how we stick with it, and I tried to get on the hospital board, and I went to a meeting, interview, and in the interview, after talking about what I've done and stuff, the doctor said to me, Dr. Pizarro, he said, you realize that this job involves more than going to meetings. And I thought, well, yeah, I guess so. I hope that I bring some value to this group. I like to educate myself and be aware of what you do and share the frustrations that you do, because it's crazy. I went to a seminar, a weekend thing, Alternatives to Violence, Diana Couch, and this was a program that started in prison to just teach people basic skills of human behavior. And they had a couple of role plays where someone is beating your dog and you have to walk up there and talk them out of it. And that's a little hard to take. The other one was you see some big guy slapping his 2-year-old child and you have to walk up and tell him how, you know, he should better handle the situation or something like. Those were tough for me because the first thing is to stop it. And we have a good neighborhood. We have people that look out, and there's these guys, kids, they drop off in vans to make big money. They sell vacuum cleaners or magazines, and they scare people. So, you know, there's all sorts of things going on, but we have a pretty good neighborhood where we watch. But I just thank you all for what you do. It's crazy, and there's no way to fix it other than holding the right attitude. And today's Valentine's Day, and it's love. And if you guys would have seen my wife and me this morning, I don't know what happened. It was good. But you would say, how long have you been dating? But if you see us when we're arguing and bickering, you'd say, this marriage is not going to last long. But, you know, love is the thing that heals us and binds us, and goofiness and camaraderie. And I appreciate this group. And I do have some ideas I'd like to come back some other time and talk about, but it's just about getting people aware of their behavior, and it's a mess. I don't have an answer either, but I appreciate what you do, and I like to spread joy and create love, and happy Valentine's Day to all of you.
Thank you, David. We appreciate your comments at a later date. That'd be great. Commissioner comments, anything? A couple things, and we've all had a chance. I think we've met with Mr. Dorico on things that express our concerns, and he enlightened us on a lot of things, and I think most of the commissioners have had a chance to meet with Mr. Dorico. And I think that this commission is going to be becoming far more effective on things that we have to look at. We've all voiced our concerns, and one thing that I kind of talked to Mr. Drico about yesterday was one of the things that maybe we should consider as a commission as far as changing the time of our meeting to maybe get more public input in as far as later in the afternoon, something that we should be able to look at and say that we can get more of the general public in here. I think we're limited as far as the time, and we're meeting at 10 o'clock in the morning. I know it's convenient for us three at times because we have sheriff board and then we come into our criminal justice. But if we could tax Lee and Johnson to see what kind of times and dates that would fit in with these gentlemen, and more important with these gentlemen, because I know how busy your schedules are, and yours too, Jocelyn, Lee, and Russ and Rick and wait. So, but yeah, but I think if we look at a different time and date, it might be beneficial for us to get more of a public input and awareness. So if we could maybe make that, does that sound good? Yeah. Okay. Request. So, okay. Any other thing? You got something to announce?
Yes, I made mention of it earlier. We have our sheriff boosters, the three of us sit on that board together, and our primary focus is to raise money for our local sheriff's department. And I think we're probably one of the, if not the number one sheriff boosters in the state. I'm sure we are. The event we have coming up is a casino night. It's going to be on April 7th. It's a Friday night. It's going to be at the PEC. And the first thing I want to say is everyone that attends the event for $75 has the capability of winning a car. So it's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to have live entertainment. Going to have some wineries there, some breweries, as well as a good old-fashioned casino night, cigar, bourbon tasting. It'll be a good event. So if you're here at this Criminal Justice Commission, obviously you care about the safety in your community, and that's one of the best ways we could support it. So hopefully we'll see you guys there on April 7th.
And again, just to really, and Howard's been heading this thing up, is that 100% of the proceeds go to our sheriff's department here. And that's what we need. We need to support our sheriffs in the Antelope Valley. So
absolutely,
So
thank you.
Thank you. Anything else? Okay, we'll stand adjourned until March 14th at 10 a.m.